Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland. I'm outside 29 Connacht Square, London. Connacht, it's not Connaught, as some Sassenach pronounce it. It's Connacht, as in the western province of Ireland. Anyway, this is the house of Tony Blair. So the Right Honourable Tony Blair is best known for having been Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from the 2nd of May 1997 till sometime in June 2007. 2007, yes. So he was born in Edinburgh in 1953. That May, I don't remember the exact date. So not a lot of people realise he's actually Scots-born. So his mother was born in Donegal, Ireland, but she moved to Glasgow as an infant. His father, I think, was born in England, but was adopted by Glaswegian parents. Tony Blair's father, Leo Blair, was born out of wedlock in about 1923 to two actors, Charlie Parsons and Celia Ridgway. So Tony Blair was always accused of being such a thespian, and I suppose it's in the blood. That's where it comes from, and that was his main enthusiasm at school, was theatre. So what else about the Blairs? Well, his father was doing a PhD in law at the time, was later called to the Bar of England, blah, blah, blah. Blair's got one elder brother, who I think is a judge, and a younger sister, don't know what she does. So when Tony Blair was a toddler, they moved to Australia. His father taught in a university there briefly. They came back to the British Isles, that was that. They lived in Durham, where his father was a university lecturer and a barrister. Tony Blair went to a cathedral school in Durham, and he was a classmate of Rowan Atkinson. Anyway, they had a mock election when he was little. They often do this at schools to coincide with a real election, and he stood as a Conservative candidate because his father was a Tory. His father started out as a communist, had a good war, joined the British Army, ended up as an officer, and become a Conservative. So I suppose, like his son, just believed in absolutely nothing, personal advancement, anything to get up the greasy pole. You know, within 6 years, had moved from one end of the political spectrum to the other. But Blair, on the day he was supposed to turn up to stand at this mock election, was ill, didn't go in. I remember at the John Rentoul, the anticipatory biography of Blair, right before he became Prime Minister, saying, perhaps it was fate was saying this far as a Conservative and no further. He later came to identify with Labour. So he was a bright boy. He went to Fettes College in Edinburgh, which is a sort of this upper middle class school there. His housemaster was Dr. Eric Anderson, who'd also taught the Prince of Wales at Gordonstoun, and then also taught me when I was later on. He was headmaster of Eton, rector of Lincoln College, Oxford. That means the head of house of Lincoln. Anyway, I won't tell you everything. Blair did French A-level as well as a few others. Towards the end of his schooling, he appeared in R.C. Sheriff's Journey's End, a play about the First World War, about these teenage soldiers in a trench. The end of the journey is the end of their life. They're in a trench, there's an attack coming up imminently. They know that within an hour, half of them will be dead. But which one? Is it going to you get killed? Is it him? Is it me? Or badly wounded? Perhaps, you know, he'll get killed. I'll just be in a wheelchair the rest of my life. If you knew that within an hour some of your best friends were going to be killed, or you were going to be killed, what would you say? What would you do? That's the question I suppose it poses, making us reflect on mortality. Anyway, so then he graduated. In those days, to go to Oxford or Cambridge, you had to stay on an extra term at school, I think it was, not an extra year. In the meantime, he went to Paris. He worked as a barman, tried to perfect his French. He then went up to St John's College, Oxford, to read law. He graduated with a 2-1. He went to the Oxford Union. He saw Michael Heseltine meet. He was impressed, not convinced. He wasn't terribly political. Fairly good at sports, played tennis, into rock and roll, playing with his band. I forget what they're called, the Ugly Rumours. A huge fan of the Rolling Stones. He said he abstained from drugs, which were very popular at the time. And that was that. So he went down, he was called to the bar. Derry Irvine gave him a pupillage. In the 70s, it was not difficult, having been called to the bar, to get a pupillage. That's when you are sort of learning the trade, like an apprentice to someone who's a fully established barrister. You're the pupil, he's the master, or indeed she's the master. And that was that. And then he got a tenancy, a permanent place in chambers. A chamber's like a barrister's office. So usually there are 20 or 30 barristers in a chambers. So you've got to get a tenancy to practice. Once you do, that's it. You got that for life, so long as you don't really foul up. And that's at this point he met a woman who's a year younger than him, Cherie Blair, a Liverpudlian. Derry Irvine introduced them, and they later got married. They got married when Blair was 26. He smoked his last cigarette right before they wed in the chapel of St John's College, Oxford. The rest is history. They had their 3 children. They're into politics, so he stood in the 1982 election in Beaconsfield. A rock-solid Conservative seat, had been part of Disraeli's constituency. It was during the Falklands conflict with the Conservative government. Margaret Thatcher had said we're going to fight against Argentina. Tim Smith was a Conservative candidate, and he had himself filmed listening anxiously to radio reports of how the British Army is performing in the Falklands. So it was really a foregone conclusion, and the Conservatives won by a thumping majority. But he had proved himself to be a brave soldier. Blair standing in a no-hope seat. And indeed, Michael Foot, the leader of the opposition at the time, the Labour Party, he gave him some sort of glowing reference saying, I'm sure he's going to have a very big future in British politics. Little did Foot know how prophetic his words were. But anyway, Blair then got himself selected for Sedgefield, a constituency in County Durham. Now, he was not, although he'd grown up in Durham, he wasn't necessarily the sort of person you think they might select. They might want to select someone identifiably proletarian. There were a lot of collieries around. He was too posh in his speech, his mannerisms, all the rest of it, but select him they did. And again, it was a very solid Labour constituency, so he won that. That was never in doubt, even in 1983, which was annus horribilis for the Labour Party. And so that was that. Some people decamped from Labour, formed the Social Democratic Party. Blair was very much a moderate. Though at this stage, he said he'd been a member of the CND, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, pledging to rid the United Kingdom of its nuclear arsenal. No deterrent. He was later to lie about ever having been a member of it. I mean, changing your mind is entirely honourable, but denying that you'd actually be a member of the CND is not. But it would seem to be de rigueur for young socialists at the time. So he got to know Gordon Brown, who'd entered Parliament 4 years earlier for Kirkcaldy constituency in North Britain. So that was that. Labour was in the doldrums, but Blair was telegenic, he was media savvy, he appealed to people who weren't natural Labour voters. So Labour went through some awful years in the mid-80s, the miners' strike and all the rest of it. And Neil Kinnock was the incredible leader. There was high unemployment, but that wasn't necessarily driving people towards Labour. So I won't tell you the whole story. He was on the front bench by 1990. 1992, Kinnock resigned as leader. John Smith became leader of Her Majesty's most loyal opposition. And, he was doing well in the polls. There was Black Wednesday in 1993, that's September, when the United Kingdom had to exit the ERM, the exchange rate mechanism. Since 1979, various currencies of the European Economic Community, it was then the EEC, were linked together to the Deutschmark, because West Germany is the strongest economy in the EEC. And they would go up and down like that. I mean, the UK didn't initially join it, eventually Sterling joined it, but it turned out to be calamitous. There was a recession, blah, blah, blah. £3 billion was spent in one day trying to keep the UK in the ERM, and the UK had to leave. So the Conservatives' reputation for economic competence was blown. Well, actually, there'd been a lot of economic incompetence under the Tories beforehand, as in with 15% unemployment. But anyway, so Blair, he was their shadow Home Secretary, and he famously nicked an epithet from well, not an epithet, an adage. From Gordon Brown saying tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, and that was that. So 1994, that May, John Smith died of a heart attack. So who was to try and take over from this hard drinker? John Prescott tried to get it. He was uninspiring. He famously was the most inarticulate man in the United Kingdom, and not very credible. Likewise, Margaret Beckett, a decent person, a bit bland. Again, didn't seem a natural leader. And then there was Tony Blair. Well, Tony Blair led from the first. He just stood out, being exceptionally gifted with verbal felicity. Let's face it, good looking, slim, and yeah, he looked like his face fits in terms of 10 Downing Street. People could picture him as Prime Minister. So that was that. So he won quite comfortably. He obviously changed the voting system in Labour to one member, one vote. Previously, there'd been block voting, and the trades union was worth millions of votes, and blah, blah, blah. So that was Blair. I won't tell you the whole story of his political career. Well, I think I'll just cut to the chase. So the Conservatives were having an awful time. They were rowing over things like the Maastricht, ironically, this treaty creating the European Union, and it was actually passed very narrowly. Labour had voted against it, even though they were in favour of it, just to discomfort the Conservatives. Privatisation and so on, sleaze. John Major, the Prime Minister, went back to basics, as in moral values. And then it came out that many Conservative MPs were having extramarital affairs. One of them, Michael Brown, he had a homosexual liaison with a young man of 19. Now, bear in mind that the homosexual age of consent was 21 at the time. So he could have been prosecuted for that, but he wasn't. The gay age of consent was lowered to 18, whereas the hetero age of consent was 16 at the time. The NHS was not doing well, and blah, blah, blah. The economy was actually booming, though. But anyway, run up to the 1997 election, Blair had his famous pledge card. They used to talk about New Labour, creating a new political party, and then he came out with this these complete non sequiturs, these asinine slogans: New Labour, New Britain, New Britain, New Labour, and all this drivel. You could even buy the little book of New Labour bollocks. But anyway, it was very popular, so this silver-tongued demagogue, he quickly gulled the masses, and that was that. So, and then they said no gloating. We thought in 1992 we were home clear, but we were so complacent about it. We were so triumphalistic with that cataclysmic rally in Sheffield, introducing the shadow cabinet as the government in waiting, that really rubbed people up the wrong way. Neil Kinnock, Labour leader 1992, getting on stage and making a complete arse of himself live on television. We're all right. We're all right. Saying, I better get some talking done here. And this conceit is what single-handedly torpedoed the Labour Party's chance of winning that election. But anyway, Blair said it's not a landslide country, but they did win by a landslide. 44% of the vote, a majority of 180 seats, a thumping great majority. So they had 418 MPs, double the number they had in 1983, and that was at the Conservatives had the lowest number of seats since 1832. Conservative share of the vote was not as bad as anticipated, 31%. Okay, some opinion polls a couple of years below had shown the Conservatives on 20%. They were going to be already wiped out, but lost every single seat in Mid-Britain and indeed Caledonia. So that was that. Blair, in the wee hours of the 2nd of May, he flew down in a private helicopter from Sedgefield, landed here, went to Royal Festival Hall in the South Bank, and I stayed up all night watching it. And one of my friends, he was a Conservative as well, he crashed out, he went to sleep. So I very cruelly woke him up about 7 o'clock in the morning saying, we've won, and then woozy-eyed he went to see the television to see we definitely hadn't won. What a nasty trick that was, but I knew I'd never get a chance to do that one again. So I remember at the time saying Conservatives will lose the next election and we'll definitely lose the one after that. We might have the chance of one after that. I said we'd come back in 2009. I got it wrong by 1 year. Anyway, so people used to talk about the Conservative Party never being the government again, nor indeed being the official opposition, nor even being a party. The party was going to wither and die. The Liberal Democrats would overtake them. Well, it didn't happen. Anyway, I shan't take you through Blair's 10 years as Prime Minister, the longest period of Labour government, and the longest serving Labour PM, of course, and that was that. So here he lives. He's got 4 children. Leo was born in 2000 when he was in Downing Street. His wife said always vigorously defended her privacy, but violated her own privacy by saying that the child was conceived because she didn't take contraceptive equipment to Balmoral. Thanks, we could have done without that, too much information. So Blair's got a daughter called Catherine, they spell it R-Y-N, Catherine, who in 2000 and I think it was 2004 attempted suicide, but there was an injunction not allowing us to say that. She's now a barrister. He's got 2 sons. He's got, the older son's not Leo, Ewan, and I can't remember the other one, went to the University of Bristol. They own property worth £27 million, the Blairs. There was a story that Blair was having an affair with Wendy Cheng, who was formerly married to that American-Australian media mogul. Goodness, what's his name? Rupert Murdoch, but I think that's not true. So Blair's got Tony Blair and Associates, which is about international relations, trying to provide PR from some of the world's worst despots. He's got the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. No, that's not worshipping Tony Blair, but the man is very hubristic and has an exceptionally high opinion of himself. He did achieve a lot. He had phenomenal communication skills. Now, I was a day one abominator of Blair. I always despised him and saw him for the complete charlatan and showman that he was. However, I do have to hand it to him. Okay, what's his greatest achievement? He made the NHS a lot better. And I think people don't sufficiently appreciate that. If there's one thing we've got to give him credit for, we must hand it to him for that. Anyway, that's Tony Blair. Usually you'll see 2 armed police out there, so they're not there right now. Around the corner, there's the gate to the Mews. As in the old days where the horse-drawn carriages would go. MEWS, Mews, but there's no police officer there because he's not resident at the moment. I don't know where he is. He's got a number of houses, had one in the Sedgefield constituency, and goodness, I don't know where. So going around, jetting around the world, thinking he's still a world leader, lobbied to try and be elected president of the European Union, if such a position was ever created. You know, this new party, Change UK or whatever it's called, the Independent Westminster Group, they considered inviting Blair to join because Blair doesn't identify with the current Labour Party. So that is Tony Blair, someone who really has lost touch with reality a long time ago. As the Tory whips say, no Prime Minister leaves Downing Street entirely sane. doesn't realise just how reviled he is by large sections of the public. But Blair does point out that beyond these shores, people have a more balanced view of his record in government. Iraq is etched on his grave. I actually approve of the liberation of Iraq, but most people think that it turned out to be a catastrophe. Right, I'll switch it off now.